The story begins with how one beautiful woman woke up in an empty bed. When she looked around, she realized that she was in an unfamiliar room. The woman sat in bed and tried to remember what had happened. After all, what came to her mind was completely indecent. The woman was sweating from those memories. It was embarrassing to even think about such a thing. She looked around her bed and room and saw her white underwear strewn on the floor. Nearby lay an elegant dress in high heels. What she definitely understood was that this was not her home. The woman said aloud that the house was not hers, and in response she heard a painfully familiar voice say that of course it was not her house. The woman was surprised and turned her head. A man was sitting on a chair opposite the bed. It was he who answered her. Even after falling asleep, she could not tell where was the dream and where was the real reality, so she tried to understand what had happened. The woman realized that she was naked, so she covered herself with a veil and looked at her husband. Of course, she knew him. He was her legal husband. She asked Yan Xuanya where they are, but the man was clearly not in the mood for social conversations, so he shouted in a raised tone that how dare she even ask him such a thing. He got up from his chair in irritation. The husband came close to his wife and angrily asked her where his lover had gone. He will not allow himself to be bullied and therefore demanded immediate explanations from his wife. The woman looked at the man with open eyes and did not know what to answer him. A completely different girl named Yao Qin pressed the camera button and took not the first picture. An elderly woman monitored the quality of the pictures and told that girl to take a few more pictures, so that the evidence of the affair on the side would be more than enough. Yao Qin only managed to answer that the number of photos is already quite significant, so taking more shots would be superfluous. There was enough evidence for that. A woman with tears in her eyes sat naked in bed and asked to be believed, because she was not involved in those events in which they wanted to narrow her right now, especially in such dirty ones. That elderly woman just angrily snapped at the girl so that she wouldn't dare to call her mother again, because it sounds just disgusting from her mouth. Then the girl decided to seek support from her husband and asked him to tell her mother that she had done nothing wrong. In despair, she did not know who to turn to for support, but the husband did not want to listen, neither to her excuses, nor to her explanations, nor to her refusals. He was simply enraged by her behavior and was ready to kill her for bringing such shame to his reputation. He took out a paper from his pocket and threw it in the woman's face. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye and realized that she was facing a divorce petition. The woman grabbed his sleeve and tried to say something, but the husband did not even want to listen to his wife. He turned away from her and rudely told her not to bother herself with excuses, because from that moment on, they were nobody to each other. Shen Junyao angrily told the bewildered woman that she had better sign the divorce papers. Otherwise, these intimate photos of her cheating would immediately be in the press. The man got into the car, where Shen Jun was waiting for him. Yao the girl smiled with satisfaction and asked the man if their plan had worked. She was sure that it would work. Yang Xuan replied that the matter was under control, and now there was no obstacle for her to be together and marry soon. He hugged the pretty girl and kissed her passionately. Yao Qin melted into his passionate embrace and said that she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. They both did a lot for this, and now there was a reason to celebrate the victory. The next morning, Yan's wife is at the Liu family's house. Xuanya put the divorce application on the table in front of her husband and said that she could sign it, but she was not going to give away her father's shares. The girl's husband did not like this at all, so he abruptly got up from the table and slammed his fist against him. He shouted at his wife to finally agree to all the terms of the marriage contract. The man rudely said that they had no right to those shares. The wife replied that she agreed to give him 5% as compensation, and the remaining 10% belonged to her father. Yang Xuan was not going to listen to his wife to the end, so he rudely interrupted her mid-sentence and said that nothing like this could happen. The man had already come up with a plan and did not want to deviate from it. Therefore, he filed for divorce in front of his bewildered wife and said that if he was honest, she would be penniless, and besides, all people would know the whole truth about her. Yang Xuan leaned over his wife and whispered maliciously that if she continued to lash out, the situation would escalate and become even more difficult for the girl herself. The girl listened to his words and could not believe that her beloved man was saying them. She could not even imagine that he could be so cruel and cold-blooded. Until today, he was always attentive and caring. This is exactly how she dreamed that he would be all their married life. but it did not turn out as expected. Then, he generally took out intimate photos from his pocket and threw them in his wife's face. He shouted for Chen Liyue to remember the morning photos before setting the conditions for signing the statement. The young girl saw the content of those dirty photos out of the corner of her eye and cried bitterly. It was painful for them to look at them, so she cried and took the damn divorce statement in her hands. While his wife, with tears in her eyes, was signing the divorce decree, Yan Xuan demonstratively packed her things into a travel bag and threw it in the middle of the room. Chen Liyue just didn't understand that it wasn't all a dream. The husband shouted to his wife that she could only take personal things and that she could not count on any others. Yang Xuan turned sharply and left the room, and his wife took the suitcase in her hands and left. Chen Liyue had no choice but to get out of Yan's life, Xuanyi and his family. Of course, you wouldn't wish your enemy to be in such a situation, but you had to live on. When the girl was walking along the garden path, she heard someone talking sweetly behind the trees. She recognized those women's voices that said that now she was satisfied and that her plan had worked well. Yan's mother, who spoke Xuanya, and a girl named Shen Junyao. The mother asked if the girl was satisfied with the fact that her son was now divorced and now completely free from marital obligations. Chen Liyue stopped and hid behind a tree. Of course, she was interested in what was being discussed, especially when she heard that the matter concerned her and her husband directly. The girl told the elderly woman that her father had decided to invest in Lu Corporation, and Mother Yan Xuanya replied that it was just wonderful and that she would be the perfect match for her son. Chen Liyue then realized that this was all a conspiracy against her, and that anyone was only interested in money in this life. So she came to the conclusion that they all simply removed the girl from their path. Chen Liyue was already on her way to the gate, still hearing snippets of Yan's mother's conversation. Zhuanya and Shen Junyao mother said that it is not necessary to call her aunt anymore. The girl was so stunned that she did not even notice what was happening around her. She just walked with her head down and said that it turns out that the man married her only for money. Then she heard a woman's voice next to her say that she must have brains if she came to that conclusion. Chen Li turned her head and saw Shen Jun standing next to her Yao. Chen had a lot of questions in her head, but she decided to start with the main one. She asked what happened last night, because there was no point in hiding the truth from Yao anymore. The divorce application was signed. Chen Liyue tried to find out if last night was part of that sneaky girl's plan. The young girl couldn't even imagine how it was possible to be such a cold-blooded fool. Shen Junyao just laughed in Chen Li's face and said that it was like that. It was all part of their plan, and even the accident was staged because Yan Xuan did not want to share a room with her. Then, Shen Junyao leaned towards Chen Li and whispered in an ominous voice that unfortunately, she would not be able to give Yan Xuan is what he's counting on, because she's not a naive fool like Chen Li. Chen Li asked that brat who was by her side that night, and Shen Junyao explained that they hired one guy, but he said that when he came to Chen Li, someone was already there with her. Therefore, Yang Yao smiled contentedly and said that she was worried that unfortunately, they would never know who really spent that stormy night with Chen Liyue. Finally, Shen Junyao told the confused girl that they are very different from her, so she hopes that the girl is smart enough to get out of Yan's life. Xuanya is quiet by herself. 4 long years have passed since that incident. A lot has changed since that time, and everyone has already lived a whole life. Someone became smarter, someone richer, someone more successful. In the main airport, among the crowd of visitors, there was one pretty woman with a sign, Chen Liyue, the chief designer. She had been waiting for the woman for a long time and was therefore worried whether she was late. A beautiful and self-confident young woman was coming down the gangway from the plane. Her eyes shone with anticipation of something unknown and exciting. The heart began to beat much faster. In the hands of the young woman was a baby carriage, in which sat a small, handsome boy with big blue eyes and dark hair. The child looked at new places for him with interest. Chen Liyue said that it had been 4 long years since her last stay here, and she did not think that she would ever have to come back here again. The little boy asked his mother if she was born here, and the mother replied that it looked like they would have to stay here for a long time. Then the boy pointed to the woman and said that she was meeting them. Chen Liyue took her son in her arms and hugged him. She patted him on the head and told him that she was very smart, and that the woman was really her assistant who came to meet them from the plane. The woman had already lost hope of meeting someone, because almost all the people who arrived on this flight had already passed, and no one approached her. Therefore, she thought that she might have made a mistake with the arrival time. But then a beautiful woman with a child in her arms approached her and said that she was exactly the one the woman was supposed to meet. The boy also said hello to an unfamiliar woman. It has been a week since Chen Li Yue returned to her hometown. She was working on a laptop while her son was playing with toys. She raised him so that he could play on his own. Someone knocked on the door and told the woman that a special client was already waiting for her in the reception. Chen Li approached her son and said that she had to go to work and he would stay with Aunt Tang in the meantime. For several days, Chen Li had been thinking about who had given her a special appointment. The woman thought they must be acquaintances if the client was so insistent on a private meeting. Of course, such an important order made her heart beat faster, and she began to get nervous. Therefore, before entering the reception, Chen Li decided to adjust and told herself that she could do anything. Finally, the young woman dared and entered the reception room. From the threshold, she immediately introduced herself and greeted the special guest and asked how she could be useful. The person she saw in the room was the last person she expected to see there. In the room sat an insidious woman who arranged her betrayal and divorce 4 years ago. Shen Junyao smiled gloatingly at the confused girl and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Her watchful gaze simply drilled through Chen Li Yue. Chen Li only managed to say that she never expected to see her here. She thought from first to last that some unfortunate mistake had just happened. A whirlpool of emotions and thoughts was happening in her thoughts. But for the sake of her son, she had to pull herself together and properly accept an order from a demanding client. Therefore, she asked Mrs. Liu in a calm voice how she could be useful to her as a designer. Chen Li Yue extended her hand and greeted the woman in the most calm tone she could muster. Shen Jun was even upset that the woman did not have a violent reaction. Ta Shengjun decided to finish off the young woman, so she sat down on a chair and happily said that she would like to ask Chen Li to choose an ornament for her for their 4th wedding anniversary. This news naturally shocked Chen Li Yue, so she just stared at Shen Zhong in silence for the first few minutes. Nevertheless, for the sake of her son, she simply had to endure these tortures. In Chen Li's mind, there was only the thought that almost immediately after their divorce, her husband had married this devious woman and had been legally married all this time, unlike her. And this time, Chen Li took a notebook and a pen and decided to talk to the haughty Shenzhong as calmly as possible. She asked the woman if she had any special requests regarding the order. Shen Zhongyu put her hands on her sides and began to dictate her wishes. There was such an impression that there would be no end to them, and at the end, she said she wanted to see the sketch within 3 days. When the order was all written down in detail, Chen Li stood up and told Shen Jun not to worry, as they would do their best to complete it on time. But Shen Jun didn't like Chen Li's humiliation, so she stepped closer and grabbed the poor woman's clothes. She hissed viciously so that the woman would not forget who she was and stay away from Yan Xuanya away. Chen Li was even frightened by such an unexpected reaction of her ex-husband's wife, but simply refused, saying that she did not see the need for such a warning because she had no intention of doing anything. Therefore, Shen Jun burst out laughing and roughly shoved Chen Li. Shen Jun said that she hoped that the woman had the nerve not to poke her nose into their family affairs, otherwise she would not be flattered. Chen Li did not expect Shen Jun to behave like this, so she lost her footing and fell to the floor. Tears appeared in her eyes from such injustice and resentment. All this time, her son watched his mother and some unfamiliar aunt through the open door. Anger and indignation boiled in his soul. That's why he decided to definitely find a worthy dad to protect her. Therefore, the little one immediately thought in his head that so that the rich aunt could not mock his mother like that, he should find an even richer husband for his mother so that no one would mock her. The little son made a firm decision that he should find the best dad there is in this city to help his mother get back on her feet and feel confident. The little guy was developed beyond his years. Therefore, he immediately figured out how to act, and the first thing he did was ask Aunt Tan who was the richest person in their town. Aunt Tang thought that the little boy was just interested in his childish curiosity, and without a second thought, told that his office was in the neighboring house, and his name was Gong Ye Xiao. Aunt Tan also said that visually they are very similar to that man, and the little one immediately wound it on his mustache. He decided that this was exactly what he needed to use to get to that man. The very next morning, the little boy went to the Gong Corporation. The hall was quite crowded, and it immediately became clear that the corporation is in great demand. The guy understood that there was a lot of security in the corporation, and it was necessary to have a special pass card. Without it, it was simply impossible to see the president of the company. The first thing the little boy did was go to the reception desk and ask the woman that he was looking for his uncle, Gong Ye Xiao. Molly immediately decided to take advantage of the fact that he is similar to the president to the maximum. Co-workers immediately approached the woman and began to look at the little boy with interest. They all noted the similarity of the little one with the president, like 2 drops of water. The girls immediately started stroking the little boy, saying how the little man got here without protection. This caused surprise among the company's employees. Nevertheless, the child's resemblance to the president did its job, and one of the employees took his hand and said that now they will go upstairs and she will take him to the president. But when the elevator doors opened to the floor where the president was, they went out into the corridor. In the corridor, they were met by the president's secretary, who looked at the boy with surprise. The secretary immediately stopped and asked the employee why the little boy was in the office, because children should not be in the corporation during working hours. The little boy decided to save the situation and immediately, without waiting for an explanation from the employee, told the strict woman that he was Han Yuze came to the corporation to see his uncle Gong Ye Xiao. The woman carefully looked at the child. She even adjusted her glasses to see him better. She did not remember that the president had a nephew, and his phenomenal resemblance did not give her peace. The boy saw that the woman was hesitating, and his plan was now hanging in the balance. So he gently hugged the woman's leg and said that he had secretly escaped here and asked her not to tell anyone about it. The woman was moved by such cuteness. Her eyes were on that cute little boy who was looking at her with eyes full of hope that she would help him. Therefore, the woman could not stand it, took the little one's hand, and gently said that she would go with him to personally take the boy to the president of the company. The little one needed just that. He smiled with satisfaction and mentally noted that manipulating adults with the help of his directness is not so difficult. The president of the company was in his office and was reviewing the current report for the past month. He always personally supervised the work of the corporation and understood the smallest details. The door to the office opened and his assistant appeared on the threshold, holding the little boy's hand. She reported to President Gosen that his nephew had visited him. The little boy looked at him with his big blue eyes and raised his hand in greeting. A thought flashed through the president's mind when he managed to get a nephew. The president looked at the boy in confusion. He could not remember that he had a nephew, but his phenomenal resemblance nevertheless took its toll, and he told Assistant Anne that she could be free. The assistant brought another cup of delicious strong coffee and left the president of the company with his nephew alone. She was sure that they were related. Molly also decided to make himself more comfortable and climbed onto the couch opposite President Gon. He had been preparing his speech all the way and was therefore very anxious to make sure he got it all right. President Gong Ye Xiao was sipping his coffee and staring intently at this brave youngster who had made his way through the security of such a serious company on his own, and told the boy that he was not his uncle. But the boy calmly smiled and said that he knows this very well. He knows that the man is not his uncle, he is his dad. Coffee sputtered out of the president's mouth from such a statement. But the boy did not give up. He took out a photo of his mother from his backpack and placed it on the table in front of the president. The little one explained that he had come to look for a father for his beautiful mother. The boy began to tell how talented, beautiful, and owner-friendly his mother was, and most importantly, she needed a man to protect her. And that is exactly what the little one needs from the president. But the president just looked at the little boy with huge surprised eyes. He said that he could not be his father, and then asked why he was chosen by the little one for such an honorable mission. The little one did not think to hide the real reasons for his choice, so he answered sincerely, because the president is very rich and the best dad to protect his mother. The president wondered if there was only one reason for his choice. And then he looked at the little one and thought something of his own. He had no idea that the little one would be so persistent. While the president was silently in his thoughts, the little boy sat across from him and looked at the president with huge eyes, and then unexpectedly asked if the president decided to be his dad. But when the president continued to stare at the little boy in silence, he got up from the couch and said firmly that if Gong Ye Xiao didn't believe him, then it should be checked. The little one took a few hairs from his head with his hand and pulled them out. He said, this is the way to try to test it. The boy put his hair on the paper and handed it to the president of the corporation. The kid said that you can take his hair and do a DNA test. The president kept his eyes on the little boy in his office. He was simply shocked by the tenacity of this little one in his search for his daddy. The president decided to check this information, although he did not believe in this nonsense. But this similarity did not give him peace. So he reached out and took the boy's hair. The boy was so happy that he had at least a small chance to somehow make his mother's life easier that he began to jump as high as he could. Then the little boy remembered that he had been away for a long time, so he began to gather his things and said that he had to go back so that his mother would not worry about him. The president felt uneasy that such a small boy would be traveling alone in such a big city, so he suggested that one of his bodyguards take the little boy home. But the boy confidently answered that there was no need for this because he lived not far away, and his house is directly opposite the president's corporation. Finally, the little boy looked the president in the eyes and said that daddy must come to their house and visit him and mommy. The boy went to the door and turned to the president. He reminded once again what a beautiful mother he had and hoped that they would see each other soon. Then the boy closed the door and left. As soon as the door closed behind the little boy, the president was deep in thought. He was looking out the window of his office at the house where the strange boy lives. Then Gong Yexiao caught himself thinking that this was all he was thinking about all the time. And in general, he came to the conclusion that today's youth is very different from the youth of his age, and they are all quite strange. The president decided that it was all nonsense and crumpled up the paper with the strange boy's hair and threw it in the trash. Then, Gong Yexiao just stared at the paper bin for a while. But not even a couple of minutes passed. After the president threw away the paper, he immediately rushed to the trash can and started looking for that piece of paper. Gong Ye really hoped that he would be able to find him. After a long search, the president managed to get a piece of paper from the trash, and the boy's hair was there. Gong Ye breathed a sigh of relief. Anne into the room. She was his right hand, and only she could entrust confidential matters. The assistant had not yet finished talking on the phone, but immediately entered the boss's room. From the threshold, the woman asked the president why he called her. The president looked confused, and at first decided that it was all nonsense. But then he resolutely pulled his hair from his head and gave it to the assistant along with the paper containing the boy's hair. The president asked an assistant to do a DNA test on these two samples, and then he held out a piece of paper with some woman's data and asked the assistant to learn more about her. Meanwhile, Chen Li Yue was thinking about Shenjun's order. The customer said to send the sketch to the Lu Corporation, and it was clear that she would try to harm Chen Li. The woman went from room to room and constantly thought about how she should act in this situation. After all, her reputation and the work she was so proud of were at stake. When Chen Li entered the room once again, she looked around. She understood that something was missing here. Only then did it dawn on Chen Li that the most precious thing in her life was missing here. Her son, Xiao Zhe. She almost fainted from what she now realized. A woman shouted to the whole house that her son had disappeared, and this thought made her even creepier. According to this cursed order, Chen Li did not take care of her own son. The woman rushed to look for her son throughout the house. She ran around all the rooms, but her son was nowhere to be found. In despair, Chen Li fell to the floor and began to cry. She was angry with herself for not taking care of her son. A bunch of thoughts flashed through the woman's head that there was no need to focus so much on the order when her son was nearby. But then Chen Li heard some footsteps. Chen Li turned around and saw Xiao Zhe, who came from the cheekbone and cheerfully said that he had already returned. The woman had not felt such relief in her soul for a long time, but as soon as her son entered the apartment, Chen Li grabbed him by the skin and dragged him to his room. She was so angry with the boy that she was ready to kill him on the spot. The mother was the first to reprimand the child for his behavior and reminded him that several times she ordered him not to leave the apartment by himself. The son was not jokingly scared and promised that this would not happen again. Chen Li then put the little one on the couch and continued to tell him how to behave, especially when his mother was busy with important things. Then toys and books flew at the little one. Xiao Zhe barely had time to arrange them in places so that she would not fly off the sofa. Chen Li decided that she had told the little one enough about how to behave and finally gave him a book to read while she was busy with work. The little son had tears rolling from his eyes. He was, of course, insulted that he got nuts for nothing, and telling his mother where he really was even more dangerous. The next day, The president of the corporation was in his office checking the latest reports. But his thoughts after that kid visited his office were not about work at all. But suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The president really hoped that this was his assistant. When the door opened, he saw that it was her. A woman entered the office with some paper in her hands. The assistant said that the results of the DNA test were ready and handed him the results of the research. The president immediately grabbed the paper to check the results for himself. Assistant Anne watched her boss's reaction with interest because she was also curious about what the examination showed. She kept her eyes on him. When the president opened the envelope with the results of the study, he could barely stand on his feet from such a result. In the study, it was written that he and the little one are father and son. At that moment, a firework of thoughts took place in the head of the president of the corporation. He did not know how to react to such news because he had no idea that his son was already 4 years old. The assistant looked at the president and waited for what he would say to her. The president put aside the paper with the results of the study and happily said that it was simply incredibly good news. In his imagination, he was in the 7th heaven with happiness and shouted to the whole world that he became a father, and his son is just a wonderful, intelligent kid who can be envied by everyone on this earth. President Gosen immediately remembered the night he was with the beautiful girl. But then he never found out who she was or where she lived, and he had no desire to find out. The president went to the window and looked at the house that the little one was showing him. A thought flashed through his mind that a lot had changed since he got drunk 4 years ago, but now the man clearly knew what he had to do. He decided not to hide, but to take full responsibility for his son's upbringing and thought that his father would finally bring him home. A few minutes later, surrounded by an entire army of bodyguards, he was already near the house of the woman who gave birth to his son. All the people were simply in shock and thought that the shooting of some kind of film had started. President Gosen ordered the guards to surround the entire building so that not even a fly would fly. And the guards at the same time surrounded the building from all sides. They even thought of disobeying their boss. The senior of the guards gave the order to his subordinates, and everyone took their places, according to the agreed plan that they had discussed long before. People in the building did not expect such an influx of men in black suits, so they ran in different directions and thought that a robbery had begun, so they shouted for help and to call the police. When everything was cleared with the building, the guards lined up in 2 rows around President Gosen and bowed their heads as a sign of honor and respect. A chair was immediately organized for the president. Everyone present in the building understood that this was not a robbery. It was just that the richest man in their city had visited them. The question remained, what did he need from this place? The president did not waste time, so he immediately asked the people present where Chen-Li and her son were now. A woman answered that they had gone outside a few hours ago. Meanwhile, Chen-Li and her son took the elevator up to their floor. The little one asked his mother if she would go to that evil aunt today, and Chen-Li replied that she couldn't find her, so they turned back. When they raised their heads, they saw that a whole crowd of people had gathered on their floor and were looking at the woman and her son. Chen-Li did not understand what was happening here at all. Mother and son felt hundreds of eyes on them at once and immediately understood that all these people were waiting for them. Chen-Li had no idea why. One thing was clear, something was wrong here. But as soon as their eyes met with the president of the corporation, he immediately loudly shouted to his guards to grab the woman and her son. For greater clarity, he pointed to them with his hand, and at the same time, 100 guards rushed at the woman, who had no idea what was happening here. Her heart began to beat wildly, and her mind told her that things would not end well here. Therefore, the only thing that occurred to the stunned woman was that she needed to get her feet out of here as quickly as possible. Chen-Li grabbed her son's shirt and shouted that they should run. The president gave orders to capture the boy at any cost, and he also ran to catch up with the frightened woman, who was running as fast as possible to the elevator. When everyone ran to the elevator where Chen-Li ran into, the door was so thick that no one could squeeze through the door. Everyone shouted, then to move, then to remove the leg, then to let go of the hand. The president himself was the first to squeeze into the elevator. As soon as he was inside, the elevator doors closed, and the elevator went to the first floor, where the frightened Chen-Li pressed. The little boy huddled in a corner, and his mother, like a lioness, tried to protect him from this crooked man who tried to steal her son in broad daylight. President Gosen cleared his throat and took a deep breath. He was pleased that he had managed to squeeze into the elevator and decided to waste no time and immediately said that he wanted to take her son from Chen Li. But Chen Li did not want to listen to this nonsense, so she painfully slapped the man between the legs so that he would also lose the desire to encroach on her precious child, in whom she had invested all her heart. It was so unexpected, and most importantly so hurtful, that Resident Gong barely restrained himself from hitting her back. He just looked at her with a fierce look and tried to say something. But before he could say what he wanted, the elevator stopped and the corresponding sound signal was heard. Chen Li immediately grabbed her son and exited the elevator. The president remained on the floor to recover from the blow. When the man regained consciousness, he quickly caught up to Chen Li and the child and grabbed his hand. An enraged woman screamed, "How dare he kidnap her son in broad daylight?" But the president began to make excuses and shouted that he was not a smuggler and had the same rights to the child as Chen Li herself. And then he pulled something out of his pocket. When he took out a document from his pocket, he threw it right in the woman's face so that she could read the results of the DNA test in detail. Chen Li picked up the document and read that it was written in black and white that Chen Yu's and Gong Ye Xiao are father and son. The probability of a natural match was 100%. She simply could not believe what she was reading with her own eyes. It was so unexpected that after reading it, Chen Li just stared at the paper with the DNA test results in silence. Then the woman asked in her voice who this Gong Ye Xiao is. And the man raised his voice out of indignation. He yelled that there was no need to pretend she didn't know the richest man in this town. Then the memory flashed in the woman's mind when she had sex with a stranger. Now it became clear that that man was this Gong Ye Xiao, the father of his son. The woman hugged the little boy to her and shouted that she doesn't care who he is, but she is not going to give him her son and will fight for him to the last. Their views collided in this struggle. They were ready to kill each other because no one was going to give in. Only the little boy really wanted to reconcile them, so he shouted at them to stop. Only after Yu's words did they crouch in front of the little boy and began to persuade the boy to go with them. Each of them wanted the little one to choose him. But before they had time to figure out their relationship, the elevator doors opened and a beautiful woman appeared in the corridor. Chen Li recognized her immediately, so she turned to Shen Junyao by name. Shen Junyao immediately began rehearsing at a confused Chen Li. How dare she ignore her, and why she should be looking for this designer to get her order. Na Chen Li only managed to answer that it was Sheng Jun who was hiding from her. Ta Shen was only angered that the woman was trying to make excuses, so she swung to hit Chen, who was arguing with her. The little boy was not going to put up with his mom being bullied for the second time in a row, so he stood up for her and shouted that you can't touch her. Shen Jun asked what kind of little brat was getting in her way and wanted to hit him too. But the president was not going to tolerate this, so he grabbed the woman's hand and told her not to be so arrogant. Shen Jun looked at this man and shouted who the hell was he to dare to touch her. She was not used to being contradicted by anyone, so this was unusual for her. And then, the thought flashed through her mind that she had seen this man somewhere. And later, it dawned on her that President Gozan was standing in front of her. So she immediately smiled and introduced herself. Shen Jun said that she was from the Liu family and thought that it would somehow affect the situation. But the president said that he doesn't care who she is, and she has 3 seconds to disappear from here forever. Shen Jun didn't need to be repeated twice, so she flew out of the corridor in an instant, leaving no trace of her. The little boy was simply overjoyed. He jumped up to the very ceiling and shouted that his father was the best, and finally he would put that evil aunt who insulted his mother in her place. On the joys of Xiao Yuze bent over the president and hugged him tightly. Chen Li just blinked. She was also glad that someone stood up for her, and she didn't have to endure Shen's humiliation. Shen Jun ran out into the corridor and took a breather. She began to think about what had just happened in the corridor. She couldn't believe how Chen Li was standing next to President Gong. Shen Jun peeked out from around the corner and hissed that that vile Chen Li had suddenly snuck up on Gong Ye Xiao. And she decided that she just had to tell everyone when the time came. The president with Chen Li and his son went to the residence of Gong to have dinner together after such a rich first meeting. There were exquisite and very tasty dishes on the table, but after looking at such a rich table, Chen Li said that Gong Ye Xiao should not even think that she can buy Xiao so easily with expensive food. And she looked sternly at the president of the corporation. At that time, the president was spoon-feeding his son, and they were both so happy at that time. For a moment, it seemed to them that they had known each other all their lives. Chen Li was unhappy. Such unexpected tenderness of an unknown man for her own son was maddening for her, so she could not calmly watch this idol. And then, the little one almost knocked the ground out from under Chen Li's feet. He suddenly asked his mother if they could stay the night with his dad tonight. Chen Li was in a categorical mood, so she quickly and clearly answered that they could not stay here. The president looked at the woman and could not understand why she was so hostile. But the little one was developed beyond his years and knew very well how to manipulate adults. That's why his eyes started to fill with tears, and after a second, he started crying. And after a minute from Xiao's eyes, tears just flowed like rivers. The president did not even know what to do in such a case. Chen Li approached the little one and said that she agreed to stay here. The president was both pleased and somehow unusual that a woman and her son would stay at his place for the night, so he said that he would order someone to take care of their room. Gong Ye Xiao looked at the woman holding his son and couldn't help but smile. Today he felt himself in a new role for himself, that of a father, and he even liked it. Then the president thought about the fact that today is the first time when anyone will stay at his place, and he should prepare well for it. Therefore, the president immediately took out his phone and made a phone call to his assistant, whom he asked to buy things for the woman and send them here, because he will stay with the woman for the night. When the assistant heard this request, she almost dropped the receiver. She could not believe that the president, who bypassed women by the 10th road, would have a woman stay for the night. When the assistant asked what things he should buy, Gong Ye Xiao explained that he needed to buy clothes for the night. At that time, the president meant a sleeping suit for sleeping. The assistant, in her mind, drew sexy underwear and various things for intimate games. Therefore, she said that she understood everything and asked the president not to worry, everything will be done. When the president hung up the phone, he thought for a while about the fact that his assistant was somewhat surprised and excited, and then he thought that it was just her mood. Meanwhile, Chen Li prepared a bath for her son to bathe. She checked that the water was the right temperature and put some toys in it so that the little one would have something to play with. President Gosen approached his son and stroked his head. He gently told the little one that Dad would help him bathe today, and the little one happily agreed. Then, Gong Ye Xiao took his son in his arms and carried him to the bathroom. He said that it was time to take a shower after today's stressful and difficult day. The pensive woman kept her eyes on the president and her son. She caught herself thinking that she hadn't seen her son so happy and joyful lately. But then she looked at Gong Ye Xiao and saw that he had also started to undress. When his shirt was completely unbuttoned and the man's body was exposed, Chen Li blushed to the roots of her hair. Her eyes could not tear themselves away from the pumped-up body of the young man, so she asked him in surprise what he was doing. The man smiled and said he just wanted to take a bath with his son. The little one was very happy that they were going to bathe together and jumped into the bath and joyfully shouted that you don't need to take off your clothes when you have to bathe. And he invited his mother to join them. Xiaozu began to play and pour water on his mother. Very soon her clothes got wet and the mother told her son to stop playing, because there was not even a scrap of dry place left on her. Gong Ye Xiao looked at the woman who was playing with her son. Her clothes were already completely wet and clung to her slender figure. A thought flashed through my mind that Chen Li was quite cute. The young woman felt how his gaze simply drilled right through her, so she tried to cover herself with her hand and shouted to the president that there was no need to stare at her like that. The president himself felt uncomfortable, as if he had been caught spying as a teenager. He said that he did not want to offend the woman and said that there were already things in the room to change clothes. Chen Li flew out of the bathroom with relief because it was quite uncomfortable to be there. She told her son that she would see her later and ran to her room. On the way, she thought how attentive Gon was, but when she opened the closet, her opinion suddenly changed. On the hangers, there were rather revealing sexual underwear. Chen Li screamed that Gong was a real pervert. Meanwhile, Anne's assistant walked along the street in a good mood and thought that the president would be very pleased to see her purchases on his chosen one. The next morning at work, Chen Li discussed the order with Ms. Liu, an assistant. Chen Li said she wants all the accessories along with the diamonds, which looks pretty weird. The girls drank coffee and chatted happily. They had a lot to talk about, because this order did not leave anyone's head. But then the assistant said in surprise that Gong Ye Xiao is coming here. Chen Li turned her head and saw President Gong Yixiao parking his car on the street next to their office. He looked simply unsurpassed in a black, strict suit. Through Chen Li's mind that he had been getting in her way too often lately. The assistant reported that the president was looking for her in the company this morning, and then the assistant asked if they don't meet sometimes. And confused, Chen Li shook her head, saying that, of course, there can be no talk of any meeting. The young woman was so emotionally trying to prove that nothing was happening between her and the president that she did not notice how a man approached her from behind and spilled coffee on him. Chen Li turned around and began to wipe the coffee off the young man's expensive suit. The thought flashed through her mind that this was the only thing she lacked for complete happiness today. But the young man grabbed her hand and called her name. Chen Li looked up, and when their eyes met, she realized that standing before her was her ex-husband, Lu Yangshuan. When she realized who was standing before her, she pushed his hand away and told him to get away from her. Of course, the woman did not expect to see him here. Lu Yangshuan came closer to the young woman and said that they needed to talk. And he added that he wanted to compensate her. But Chen Li had no desire to talk. When Lu Yang reached out to touch Chen Li, someone pushed his hand away. President Gong walked up to them and covered the frightened woman with him and sternly told Lu Yang to stay away from her. The two men's eyes met. Lu Yang asked if President Gong and Li Wei were friends. But the president rudely replied that it was none of his business, so he was not going to report to anyone here. Of course, Lu Yangshuan knew who was in front of him. He could not know the richest man in the country. Therefore, the desire to argue with him disappeared from the very beginning. Therefore, after thinking for a while, Lu Yangshuan told the woman that when she was already busy, he would leave first and not bother her anymore today. The man turned and walked away. Looking at her ex-husband's back, Chen Li began to wonder what kind of compensation he was talking about, and even more so, what he had in mind when he came up with it. The president did not wait long and began to teach Chen Li what to do with Xiao's mother, because she should be as attentive as possible to her personal life so as not to harm their son in any way. This, of course, angered Chen Li, and she shouted to the president that her personal life should not bypass him in any way. And if not for Xiao, then she wouldn't contact the president at all. The young woman abruptly turned around and walked away from President Gosen. He shouted at her back that she could go and flirt with someone else if she dared. When Chen Li approached the assistant, she asked how Chen Li met Gong Yixiao and Lu Yangshuan. Chen Li replied that the first is the father of her son, and the second is her ex-husband. The assistant's eyes bulged out of her forehead. The world's richest man is Chen Li's child's father, and the city's richest man is her ex-husband. It just didn't fit in the poor woman's head.
The evening came again. At the Gong residence, the young woman took a bath and told her son that it was time for bed, so they should go to the bedroom to relax.
Xiaozhou was playing with Dad at that time. The man was doing push-ups from the floor, and the little one was sitting on his back and laughing happily. Chen Li's mouth fell open at how gorgeous the president's figure was. Every muscle on his body tensed seductively as soon as Gong Yixiao made active physical movements. Chen Li caught herself thinking that she couldn't take her eyes off his body, so she caught herself in time. The young woman barely had time to tear her eyes away from the president when Xiao ran up to her Z and asked her to spend the night in her father's bedroom so that they would all sleep in the same bed together as a real family. Chen Li tried to pull away and said that they should go to their room, but the boy grabbed her by the shirt and dragged her to the bed. The woman decided not to argue so that he would not throw a tantrum at night. When they all finally got into bed, the president said gently to little Xiao, because he is still small and should go to bed on time and not a second later. Therefore, the little one immediately closed his eyes. While the father was talking to his son, Chen Li thought that nothing bad should happen because the little one was with them. Therefore, she decided to relax and rest as she should. But the young woman did not have time to close her eyes when she felt that someone was breathing above her. She opened her eyes in fright and saw that Gong Yixiao was leaning over her and looking at her with a passionate gaze. The young woman was confused and asked what he was doing. But the president calmly replied that she herself must understand well what exactly he is doing, and began to descend below her. He looked first into her eyes and then gently took her chin with his hand. At first, the woman did not know how to react and thought he was joking. But then his lips began to come close to hers. The young woman understood that it was all quite serious and that his intentions were not to wish her a good night. She pushed the president away as hard as she could. The president stopped and looked at Chen Li in surprise. But she did not waste her time, but jumped out of bed and ran as fast as she could from the bedroom. As she walked, she shouted that Gong Ye Xiao was a jerk. The next morning, she as a young family all drove in his car on their business. Gong Ye Xiao said that he would pick up Xiao today. She wants to play, so she can do her work calmly. Chen Li liked this offer very much. She even smiled and thanked him. Xiao, in the meantime, he also decided to make his proposal to have lunch together today. The young woman promised that they would definitely do so. All the more, she needed to clarify her relationship with Gong Ye Xiao so that such incidents would not occur in their lives again. When the young woman was getting out of the car, she thought that when the employees saw the expensive car she drove in, there would be such violence that it would be better to disguise herself in advance. Chen Li didn't want anyone from the office to notice her with the president, so she carefully crept into the office to attract as little attention as possible. When the woman entered, she noticed that something was being discussed. In one of the rooms, a disgruntled Inca demanded that Chen Li Yue be called immediately because she dared to do something wrong. But the employee explained that Chen Li did not have a job yet. Through the window, Chen Li noticed how his ex's wife had caused a scandal in the office and began to go through the options in her head, why she came here again and what she needed. But then Chen Li decided not to guess and just find out what the matter was personally. The woman opened the door and entered the room. She asked Mrs. Liu how she could be useful. Before Chen Li could finish her sentence, an angry woman pounced on her and began to ask why Chen Li met Yang Xuan yesterday. Because she is his wife. Chen Li listened carefully to the angry woman's screams and said in a calm tone that she had 3 things to tell her. The first thing is that they met her husband yesterday by chance. The second thing is that she will definitely return the shares of her father's company because they got them with the help of blackmail, and this should be a fair decision. Chen Li's tone changed dramatically, and she told Mrs. Liu in a raised voice to get the hell out of here if she didn't have any more work-related questions. But Mrs. Liu just grinned in satisfaction. She said that she should not even dream about the shares because it was all stipulated in the divorce agreement. So let him not open his mouth on shares. Mrs. Liu turned and left the room, and Chen Li said that no one knows what will happen in the future, so they will still see whose shares will be. Mrs. Liu went to the ladies' room. In Mrs. Liu's head, how she was having dinner alone at home and waiting for her husband, while he was cheating on her with Chen Li Yue. Of course, she was not going to tolerate this. But when Mrs. Liu looked in the mirror and began to powder her nose, she noticed 2 office workers gossiping emotionally about something in the corner of the ladies' room. The women discussed the news that Li had driven to the office this morning in a very expensive car. And then they jealously shared the news that this single mother had somehow made the president run after her. Mrs. Liu immediately began to listen to the latest gossip of the office company where Chen Li works. In the head of the treacherous woman, an assumption immediately arose whose son Chen Li might be, if Gong is paying such attention to her. There was no need for great intelligence for this, especially for such a rascal as Mrs. Liu. After a few minutes, a whole devious plan appeared in her head. Mrs. Liu angrily closed her makeup bag and said angrily that now she will see how Chen Li can seduce Gong Ye Xiao when it reveals the real truth to everyone. Meanwhile, the restaurant was full. All the tables were occupied by visitors who tasted delicious dishes and waited for their next orders. Gong Ye Xiao was also sitting at one of these tables. He had already ordered something and was waiting in solitude for those who were supposed to keep him company for today's lunch. Chen Li Yue quickly came to his table and apologized for being late. Of course, if not for the incident with Mrs. Liu, she would have made it, but she had to be delayed because of that passage. But when Chen Li Yue sat down at the table, she noticed that her son was not around and asked the president where Xiao was. Now Zhu. After all, it was Gong Ye Xiao who promised to look after the little one today. The president opened the menu and began to study what else could be ordered to better continue the dinner. Then, he calmly replied that Xiaoze went to the dressing room. It was just a very good opportunity to talk to the president alone, as Chen Li wanted. So she started right off the bat and told Gon that they would need to set some rules. The young woman explained that if she and her son continued to stay in his residence, first of all, what happened between them yesterday is categorically unacceptable in the future. Li said that from now on, there should be no physical contact between them, and added that their son should sleep separately, either with his father or with her. and the woman added that she did not want to have anything to do with it. The president didn't like it anymore, so he got up sharply and put the menu aside. He came close to Chen Li and said that there could be nothing in common as they had a son together. But Chen Li pushed the president away and shouted that she did not want to have anything to do with him, and that today she would take the little one and go home, and the husband would not even see him again. The president carefully listened to everything that the nervous Chen Li wanted to tell him, and said in a calm tone that it would be as she wished. Chen Li fell silent in surprise. She thought that now there would be a real scandal about where their son would live, and the president so quickly agreed to all her conditions. Moreover, she did not expect that he would not be against the fact that she would simply take her things today and leave him with her son. Meanwhile, Xiaoze came out of the dressing room and greeted his mother. Chen Li picked up her son after dinner, and they went to her home. The mother asked her son if he would eat spaghetti, and he happily replied that he did not refuse and would even eat 2 servings. Chen Li was surprised that the little one was talking so happily after they were left without the president, because they had become very attached to each other in recent days. That young woman simply thought that the little one would forget about that man later, and in a good mood went to prepare dinner as soon as her son asked for 2 portions. Chen Li thought that her son was very hungry and hurried to the kitchen. And the little one, meanwhile, as soon as the door closed behind his mother, ran into the living room and pulled a chair with him. Then, he moved the chair to the door and deftly climbed onto it. A few seconds later, the boy opened the door, and President Gong Yixiao appeared at the door, waiting for the boy to let him in. The father said that he fulfills his promises and will not leave the little one alone. And the son firmly grabbed Dad's hand and pulled him into the room, telling them to go as quietly as possible. Chen Li heard the front door open in the kitchen and hurried to the living room to see what was happening there. She asked Xiao on the way, who came and how could he open the door himself? But as soon as the young woman came to the living room, she saw the president there, who was quietly sneaking into his room with her son by the hand. To say that it was just a shock for the woman is an understatement. The young woman immediately started shouting at Gong Yixiao what he was doing here and how he got to their apartment. They agreed that there would be nothing in common from today. The boy jumped into his father's arms and began to look at his mother with his pitiful gaze. The president was also not going to be silent and said that he would be where his son is. Chen Li had no choice but to let the president stay at their place to play with his son for a while. The president sat comfortably on the sofa, and she had been talking happily with the little one for several hours. But their idyll did not last long. A young woman appeared in the room, and her mood was, to put it mildly, not very good. Chen Li sternly pointed at the clock and said that Mr. President had been staying in their apartment for too long, so it was time for him to go home and leave them and their son alone. But tears welled up in the little boy's eyes from such words, and he asked his mother to let his father stay, because he wanted to play with him some more. Of course, a woman could not refuse her beloved son, especially when he begged her so much. The little one was very happy that he managed to persuade his mother to let his father stay, and he shouted that she was the best. Then the little boy ran to the closet and took out a huge album with photo cards. He brought it to the president and decided to watch it together with Dad. Xiaoze sat in Dad's arms and opened the first page. The little one commented on each photo because at that time Dad was not around, and it was important for him that he saw how he grew up. The president was also interested in seeing the times when he could not be close to his son and spend every day of his childhood with him. The son said that in this photo he had just been born. In the next, his mother had already been discharged from the hospital with him. In another photo, he was already 100 days old, and there he was going to school for the first time. That's how they looked at the photos from little Xiao's childhood. Well, then the president noticed that the boy was no longer talking, but was just flipping through the album, and then he stopped flipping. Gong Yixiao looked at his son, who was already snoring sweetly and dreaming his 10th dream. He was lying in the hands of the president. The man gently patted the little one on the cheek and could not help but admire such a picture. Then he remembered how his father treated him, and it sent shivers down his spine. Father always shouted that the boy had to be ruthless in order to achieve victory and the top in this life. Then everyone around doubted the young man and his leadership abilities. But when he kicked out his own uncle and cousin, he became the president of the Gosen Company. Of course, the president did not want this little boy to endure all the abuse that Gong Yixiao himself had to endure. But life dictated its strict rules of big business. Gong Yexiao wanted the child to grow up happy and carefree, but he was also the grandson of the Gong family, and this required other obligations from the child, and it was worth thinking about it right away. 3 years ago, Gong Yexiao expelled his uncle and 3 cousins, and now he was not going to lose, but now he should also take care of his own son's safety. Chen Li interrupted his heavy thoughts. She quietly entered the room and took her son from the hands of the president. He had to be taken to his own room so that the little one could sleep peacefully. The mood of the young woman was completely different from the one with which she met President Gosen today. Chen Li calmly said that she would take the little one to his room, and then she added that she had prepared a change of clothes and a bath for the president, so that he could also rest peacefully after a hard day's work, because it was already too late to go home. The president was very moved by such a proposal of a young woman. After all, he thought she would kick him out the door as soon as the little fell asleep, and he would have to get home in the middle of the night. When the young woman carried the baby into the room, the president thought that he had no idea that this woman would be so perfect. He even considered bringing her into his home. Therefore, Gong Yexiao decided to take advantage of his son's mother's hospitality and went to the bathroom. He himself wanted to have a good wash and a good rest. Chen Li herself, when she was carrying the little one, stopped by his room and waited for the door to the bathroom to close behind the president. It was very important for her to make sure that her husband started washing. And as soon as the door slammed shut, the thought immediately flashed through Chen Li's mind that this arrogant man would pay for all the abuse he had caused her on the first day of their acquaintance. Meanwhile, the president was taking a bath. Unsuspecting, he was in a good mood and thought that his son's mother was quite beautiful and pretty, as well as attentive and caring. Chen Li was putting the little one to bed. As always, she sang a lullaby, even though her son was already asleep, but it was their bedtime ritual. Mother's soft song filled the entire nursery, but then, this idyll was disturbed by someone's scream. The president was shouting in the bathroom, demanding an explanation as to what kind of things had been prepared for changing clothes. Chen Li smiled upon hearing this. She immediately left the child's bedroom so as not to wake him up and waited for President Gong Yexiao to appear. She rubbed her hands with pleasure because now their score was equalized. 1.1. The door of the room opened and the president appeared on the threshold, dressed in women's clothes. From the expression on his face, it was clear that he was simply seething with rage. The enraged president forced out that Chen Li's pajamas really weren't bad. He was ready to tear apart the young woman who dared to make such a joke on him. The young woman couldn't hold back her emotions, so she fell on the couch and burst out laughing. This is exactly how she imagined her revenge when she saw revealing things in her closet the first time she stayed at his place. Chen Li Yue laughed merrily and said that the president has a very good figure and actually suits him very well in such clothes. But the mood of the man was completely opposite to the mood of the young woman. But then, unexpectedly, the president came closer to the young woman and began to tear his clothes. After a second, the clothes were torn to pieces and lying all over the room. The president watched the young woman's reaction and said that if she did that to his clothes, then let her now enjoy his naked appearance. But Chen Li closed her eyes in shame. She shouted that he was a pervert and asked why he had taken off his clothes. Her face was so red that it was visible for several meters. The young woman closed her eyes and began to run from the room. There was only one thought in her head, so that the pervert did not run after her, because seeing him almost naked was not part of her plans. She stopped in front of the door to her bedroom and turned to the president. Chen Li shouted for the man to sleep on the sofa and not to enter her room under any circumstances. The door to Chen Li's room slammed and locked. The president remained in the corridor. He looked at the door and said that he should dream more, that he would sleep on the sofa in the corridor. The morning came. The sun made its way into the young woman's room with its rays and shone brightly in her eyes, announcing that a new day had come and it was time to wake up. Chen Li felt the warmth of the rays and their bright glow, but the young woman did not want to open her eyes. This meant the usual routine again: cooking, work. I wanted to lie in the crib a little longer. But when her eyes did open, the first thing she saw was the president. He slept peacefully in her bed next to a young woman in only underwear. For some time she just silently looked at him and thought that she simply did not wake up, and this was part of her dream. She scrolled through yesterday's events and clearly remembered how she locked the room with the key. But when she realized that it was not a dream and that this man was really lying with her in her bedroom, the young woman screamed so loudly that her scream was heard by people far from the house. Out of shock, the young woman jumped off the bed and crouched away from the bed. She cautiously looked at the young man and waited for some explanation of what was happening now. Her scream woke up the president, and he sat up in bed and looked around. Out of sleep, he could hardly remember where he was, and asked Chen Li why she was rehearsing like that in the morning, when everyone was still asleep. The young woman covered herself with a robe and sternly asked the president how he got to her room, and most importantly, to her bed, because she clearly remembers closing her room in the evening. But the president only smiled mysteriously. He liked the fact that she was in such a state of shock right now. He calmly explained that she was not very resourceful, and also, Gong Yexiao added that after a bit of thought, he decided to check if the spare keys were in the guest room drawer, like most houses, and that's where he found the keys. Chen Li closed her eyes and began to scold herself for not thinking of this earlier and not taking the spare keys with her in the room. The only thing she wanted at that moment was to fall through the ground, so she pulled herself together and shouted loudly that the president immediately left her room. She was so uncomfortable and embarrassed at that moment that she really wanted Gong Yexiao to get out. But the president was not confused and grabbed her hand. With a skillful movement, Gong Yexiao pulled the young woman towards him, and in a second she was already lying on the bed. A handsome man stood over her. Gong Yexiao approached the young woman almost closely and said that she had woken him up very early today, so he needed some kind of compensation for getting up so early. The young woman started kicking away from the man and yelled for him to get away from her, because nothing intimate could happen between them. But the man did not retreat. He was already quite excited. Suddenly, the door to Chen Li's room opened, and a sleepy Xiao curled up in the doorway. He rubbed his eyes and asked his parents what was going on here, that they have been behaving so loudly since the morning. The frightened president and the young woman froze in shock. Due to their personal quarrels, they have already forgotten that there is a small child in the house. The president was the first to come out of his stupor. He started mumbling something and coming up with some realistic explanation as he went, because of course they couldn't tell the truth to a child of that age. Gong Yexiao began to tell his son that dad was helping mom catch a cockroach. Chen Li looked at the president in surprise, but decided to play along with him and also nodded her head in agreement. The little boy looked surprised at his father, then at his mother. The parents' explanation was, of course, so-so. So the little boy wondered where the cockroach was that his parents had been looking for since the morning. The president immediately got out of bed and started pretending that he was trying to kill that cockroach. Chen Li also waved the pillow, playing along with the president, because she had no other choice. Gong Yexiao was very upset that the little one woke up so early and mentally blamed Chen Li for it. After all, his plans for the morning were far from searching for a cockroach throughout the apartment. That young woman was just thinking how dare this idiot get into her bed without permission, and who did he think he was? She was glad that her son had woken up and that the president's plans had not come true. The boy decided to play along with his parents and began loudly cheering them on in their search for an imaginary cockroach. This search turned into a fun game, and they all had fun together in the morning. Meanwhile, at Lu Yangshuan's house, he was working in his office. Although a computer was opened in front of him with important matters that had to be resolved yesterday, his thoughts were about something else. He reached into the top drawer and pulled out a photo. When he brought her closer to him, it became clear that his ex-wife was there, Chen Li Wei. She smiled cheerfully at him. Lu Yangshuan thought at that moment that only 4 years had passed, and Li Wei had become so attractive. He already regretted that he had behaved like that with this woman, but suddenly someone knocked on the door of his office. This sound caught him so unexpectedly that the man did not even have time to understand what was happening. The door to the room quickly opened, and his legal wife appeared on the threshold. She cheerfully greeted her husband and smiled happily at him. The woman turned to the man. He began to answer his wife and asked why she came to see him. Meanwhile, he tried to quickly hide Chen Li's photo in a drawer so that the woman would not notice it. Lu Yangshuan was pushing that damn drawer, but the photo didn't want to go all the way in there. Of course, Shen Jun's keen eye noticed that photo, and she immediately guessed who it was. Shen Jun knew how to act phenomenally, so she pretended not to notice anything and cheerfully said that breakfast was already ready. And in her head, She just wanted to kill Chen Li Yue. Lu Yangxuan said that it was very good because he had already managed to make a good evil day. And he just thought about it and didn't say or do anything for a while. Lu Yanghuan then came to his senses and remembered that he had just been invited to breakfast. The man opened the door from his office and went first to the dining room to have breakfast. Shenjun almost burst out of anger. She was angry with that animal Chen Li, who was almost everywhere in her life, and she promised herself that she wouldn't let her leave the party at the end of the month. The next morning, President Gozan tried to feed the little one a delicious breakfast and fed him from a spoon. In the morning, he ate without much desire. Chen Li wiped the baby's mouth and said that they had to go to the prep school today to enroll. The president asked where exactly she wanted to enroll their child. The young woman said that not far from their house is the Xuanyu Preparatory School, and all the children who live here go to this school. That is why they decided to enroll there. But the president was categorically against it. He said that Xiaoze has to go to the best school, where the teacher must speak at least 10 languages, and the school tax is $1 million. The man also added that the school should be well protected, at least 100 guards, and it should be quite luxurious, and the son should feel comfortable there. Such sums were not invested in the woman's head. And when Chen Li said that it was too expensive, the president said that such sums were not very expensive for him. Moreover, he does not mind saving on the education of his only son. The president patted the little boy on the head and said that Xiaoze will go to work today with Dad and come home with Dad too, because the school is near his work. But Chen Li was against such an idea of the president. She hugged her son and said that nothing like this could happen. After all, she cannot be so far from her son. But the president angrily shouted whether she wanted their son to be in the house all the time without any protection. It was clear from his mood that the president was not going to back down from his plan. The young woman saw that it was simply not realistic to argue with him now. Therefore, she said that if he wants the woman to bring him a son, then he must agree to her terms. The man understood what the conditions were. Therefore, Gong Yexiao cleared his throat and quietly said that he could promise that if Chen Li didn't want to, he wouldn't touch her. When the president appeared at his office, everyone looked with interest at the child the president was carrying in his arms. All the employees of the corporation said that this is the future president of the corporation gone. On the way to the office, the phone rang in the president's pocket. From the melody that sounded, Gong Yexiao guessed who was calling him. Therefore, he did not even look at the name of the caller and picked up the phone. It was his grandfather calling him. The president greeted him and heard the grandfather request that Gong Yexiao bring this kid to him and let him look at his son. The grandson knew that it was better not to put the grandfather's request in a long box, so he replied that he would definitely bring his son to the grandfather today at noon, as he requested. Grandfather added that he only wanted to look at the boy. He didn't want to see any other people. Gong Yexiao immediately guessed who it was about and said that he understood everything. Near the old residence of the Gosen family, Gong Yexiao came out of it, holding the little boy's hand. They headed for the building. The servant met the president and announced that the old master was waiting for the young man inside the residence, and they went to the building together. The man decided to explain to his son where they were going, so he leaned towards the little one and told the son not to worry, because now they were going to his grandfather, and Xiao because this man will be a great-grandfather. The son was clever beyond his years. He immediately understood that this respectable man was the head of their large family, and said that he must behave well to please his great-grandfather.